Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about exporting from Premiere Pro. I get a lot of questions from some of my clients who are editors or who are assistant editors who are exporting a movie for the color grade, and they want to know, what do I need to give you? Like, how do I get my movie from my timeline, my computer, to your computer without losing any quality? My advice to you would be export out of Premiere Pro if you're going to be using a workflow where your colorist actually just requires one big ProRes clip from you, or if you need to trim and transcode, or however you're going to handle it. If there's any sort of transcode happening out of Premiere Pro, these are the settings that you're going to need to use. So Premiere Pro tends to be a little bit of a black box when it comes to setting your pipeline for color processing and bit depth and all that stuff until you get to the export tab. And then you get a tiny bit of a peek of what's happening underneath the hood. But essentially, you have to manually tell Premiere Pro to render your file at a higher quality, at a higher bit depth or precision for color by selecting a couple of settings in your export tab. These are a little confusing because one of them is called render at maximum depth, and there's another setting called render use maximum render quality. And a lot of people get these two confused or conflate the two and leave both. They just select both just to be safe. And I think that is definitely the right way to go. But there may be a couple things to consider before you do that. And the third option is obviously to choose at which bit depth you want to use. And Premiere Pro gives us two options, 8-bit or 16-bit. And what I find a little silly about that is because you might as well just select 16-bit because that's what you're telling your timeline to render at. And then you can set your container bit depth limit on the codec that you choose. Because here's the thing, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up. A lot of my clients will export to ProRes 422HQ. However, warning, they unfortunately choose 8-bit per channel, or they just leave this alone because they don't want to touch anything. So here's my suggestion. If you set this to 8-bit per channel, what Premiere Pro is going to do is it's going to render your timeline underneath the hood. It's going to process in 8 bits. So even if you set your codec to ProRes 422HQ, which is a 422 10-bit container and codec, you are already limiting the output and the render quality at which you're allowing Premiere Pro to make that file. So what ends up happening, and I've made a test file for you just to show you the difference. On the timeline, there's a clip of a gradient, and a gradient is a great way to visualize the difference in bit depth rendering and the quality between the two and how it handles gradients. Why are gradients important? To you as the editor or the filmmaker, you might ask. That's a fair question. Well, things like skies or people's skin tones or shadows or just any sort of soft area in your image that has a gradual change between one, say darker shade to a lighter shade, those will be affected and will suffer from something that's colloquially known as banding. More technically, that's known as contouring. But you start to see the difference between different shades of hues, and these big blocky lines appear on your image, on your video. One of the primary reasons that happens is because an output is set to 8 bits. It's rendered at 8 bits. So here I've rendered out two separate clips from Premiere Pro. Both are 422HQ.mov files, ProRes. Both of the same resolution. The only difference is that in Premiere Pro, I did not select, in the export tab, I did not select render at maximum depth 16-bit per channel for one of the clips. For the other one I did. So I let Premiere Pro render at 16 bits per channel, but then that funneled into the output encoding, which was a 422 10-bit file, ProRes 422HQ. Okay. And you'll see the difference. If I zoom in, look at the pane on the right here. You can actually see the code levels in the gradient. And this is essentially like a technical reproduction of something you might see in the sky, of a blue sky, or like some gradient in the shadows, some sort of solid object in your frame that has a gradation of brightness values, which is all the time, all the time. There's like, if I'm coloring a film that was delivered to me in 8-bit, it's very frustrating because there's just not a lot of information. There's these big chunks, these big blocks of color and light information in the frame. So if I want to pull a key, or if I want to denoise, or if I want to work with that file and with more fidelity, I'm really limited. So I'm going to turn the 10-bit file, the one that was rendered with the 16 BPC channel, and render at maximum depth. I'm going to turn that version on. And you see it's so much softer, more gradations. There's still tonalities. You can, if I zoom in a lot, you start to see them, but then we're starting to reach the limitations of the resolution of the playback window, and then coding, you probably can't see it, but there's like a moire effect that happens with your display, but that's normal. Anytime you're working with straight lines in a display, you're going to get these weird patterns. But so you can see there's definitely a huge difference between rendering in these two different settings. So just to go back to our export tab in Premiere Pro, this is on a Windows machine, by the way, but it's the same on a Mac. Select render at maximum depth, and you want to render at 16 bits per channel. That leaves us with our final question, which is, what is this use maximum render quality? And how is that difference between render at maximum depth? What is the difference between the two? Well, the maximum render quality, you're essentially telling Premiere Pro that you want it to use higher quality, more powerful algorithms, more sophisticated algorithms to scale your video up or down, depending on whether or not you've used transforms, or you're doing animations, you're rendering text, graphics, things like that. You can scale those objects using different techniques on your timeline. And when you do, you want to make sure that you render using maximum render quality. I haven't scaled anything on this image, but I work a lot with archival footage for documentary, and just documentary film, and films in general use a hodgepodge of source material. So all this stuff comes into the timeline, and we end up scaling it up or down depending on the needs. And that will change whether or not we want to render at maximum, use the maximum render quality, and that's going to increase your render time when you export. So that's something to think about. That goes for all of this, all of these settings. When you're rendering at more precise bit depths, like deeper bit depths, like 16 bits per channel, and you're rendering using maximum render quality, certain frame in time interpolation algorithms or methods are going to increase your render time. So that's the trade-off here, but it's worth it. I mean, you need to give your colorist a master quality file, and you need to be exporting and mastering at this highest quality possible. What are your different options in Premiere Pro when you're encoding and outputting a codec? Well, there's a lot. Actually, you don't have to go to ProRes 422 HQ. If you are within a Windows universe, you can use DNX HD or DNX HR, depending on your resolution. There's very little difference between the DNX universe and the ProRes universe, outside the major critical difference, which is variable bitrate encoding, which ProRes has VBR. Basically, it's variable, so it basically looks at the scene and determines how much what the bit rate should be based on the moment and the needs of the moment, versus say using a fixed bit rate over the entirety of the timeline. So that's, sometimes you'll see a difference depending on the source material. You will see a difference in encoding and in the size of the output file on a DNxH whatever source output versus a ProRes output. You may see more efficiency in ProRes. ProRes is also optimized for rendering and playback in the Apple universe. So people in the Apple universe tend to stick with ProRes, but those of us who work in the Windows universe will oftentimes find ourselves working with the DNX flavor. Although I use Voukoder, which is free and open source, although I think they take donations. I donated. And it's in DaVinci Resolve, and it allows me to output to ProRes anything I want with a Windows machine. Easy peasy. Maybe I'll make another video for that. It's super simple. It's not rocket science at all. I did want to show you this Codec. There's a couple of really cool articles that Frame.io has made on their Frame.io Insider blog, which is a great blog, by the way. If you want to look up, they have quite a library now. They've been publishing for quite a few years now. Awesome articles. They have a couple of really good ones on codecs, including how to choose the right codec for every project. This is like a Bible. And this video that they made for codecs is also in and of itself, if you don't even want to read, if you can't read and you just want to watch a video, you're like, if you're the kid that goes straight to the picture storybooks when you were a kid in the library, then this one's for you. There's a video that takes you through the whole thing, and it's awesome. Super intuitive, super informative. There's also a guide on how to choose your codec and what the difference is between H.264 and .mov and yada yada. There's a lot of information here. But there's also this other cool article that they wrote called Compare 50 Intermediate Codecs on One Page. Yes, please. This is like a Bible for you if you wanna look up what all of the different flavors of codecs that we use in post-production. This basically takes you through all of the different resolutions and bit rates and chroma subsampling and bit depth for the container and all that stuff. So if you want to learn a little bit more and dive deeper into that, I'm going to leave the links for all this stuff down in the video description below. Well, that's about all I got. Hope it helps. If you like the video, please like it with the thumbs up thing and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.